We dream a world. Carrying the light from my grandparents, Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, is a loving tribute by Yolanda Renee King and an inspiring picture book about making a difference in the world. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and welcome to the Kids Bookshelf. Ahead, we'll explore the book, and I'll talk with Yolanda about the inspiration behind it. I requested and was provided with a copy of the book, but this video is not sponsored. Yolanda Renee King never knew her grandfather, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but she is one of the countless activists inspired by his words and actions. She's the first and only grandchild of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King. She was named after her aunt, Yolanda King. Dr. King and his wife, Coretta, helped change the course of history by spreading a message of equality for all people, regardless of their race or color. Inspired by the path set by her grandparents, Yolanda is trailblazing her own way forward. She joins us to talk about her picture book, We Dream a World. Yolanda, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, before we talk specifically about the book, I'm curious about, as you were growing up, what you heard about your grandfather, Martin Luther King Jr., and his involvement with the civil rights movement. What are some of your earliest memories about learning about him?
Well, from a very young age, I was always taught about how significant he and my grandmother were during the civil rights movement. And I was always told about how great they were. And I remember even to this day, people still will stop me and just thank our family. And they'll be like, thank you all. Thank my parents and I. And they'll be like, and thank you for what they did, meaning my grandparents. And so people were constantly expressing gratitude. And so I knew that from day one that I was in a unique situation. But it wasn't until 9 that I really realized the significance of their legacy and of the and how really I really understood it. It's almost when someone tells you something and you're like, yes, I understand it, but you don't really you don't have that feeling. And so finally I was able to understand it and see it in my own eyes rather than, I guess, someone else telling me.
You were sort of growing up in the shadow of your grandparents. What kind of impact did that have on you?
Well, I will say that while there is a lot to it and there's a lot of responsibility, my parents always tell me that I don't have to do this work. I don't have to be in activism. And if I decide to, and if I continue doing what I'm doing, I certainly do not have to do it the way my grandparents did it. And so having that layer of relief is really what helps me. And honestly, if we're talking about pressure and the big legacy and being in, I guess, the shadow, well, I feel like that comes more from the outside world than the inside world, because those in the inside world understand that, well, yes, I may share the DNA or a chromosome or something with my grandparents, but that doesn't necessarily mean I have to be them. I don't have to do things the way they did. And my parents just told me that you don't have to be them. You're Yolanda Renee King, and we're not going to force you to be them. We're not going to force you to impersonate and act like them. You're your own identity. So being able to have that really is, I think, what allowed me to ease into the work and do the work. Of course, though, there's still, I guess, a big burden, or if you want to call it, or a lot to carry and responsibility because their legacy was so big. But I still have, I guess, a layer of comfort.
So you were able to forge your own path, do things your own way, but do you still consider yourself an activist, but just in your own way of doing things?
Well, of course, I consider myself an activist, and I don't really think that just because someone does something a certain way, I don't think that's what I don't think that's what is the final factor that determines whether you're an activist or not. I think that there's so many ways to do activism. There's so many ways to get involved. Activism is about using your platform for good. So whatever that platform is, whether it be through a book, music, art, acting, theater, sports, social media, whatever it is, you name it, it's about using that for good to make an impact. And I think that a big misconception is that there's like a specific way to do that, but no, like I think that there's a distinct way, and so you have to figure out how to use that, how to use your platform to communicate and make a good impact. And so that's what that's what I do, and I intend to continue to do. And so I think that that's the final thing that determines whether you're an activist or not. And I also think it's important to note that there's a difference between an activist and a leader. And a lot of times they do kind of like connect and go together, like activist, leader, but they're both of them are two separate concepts, but they can be one. Someone can have both of those, I guess, identities, if you want to call it.
So as you mentioned before, there are different platforms you can use to engage the world, and one of them that you have done is to create this book, We Dream a World. So tell us about why it was important for you to write this book.
Well, I think that it's important to, yes, talk about these issues, which we have been doing we've been doing that a lot. But I think that it's also time to show what that looks like. What does a world without racism look like? What does a world without violence look like? What does a world with a clean climate look like? What does that look like? And I think the book literally through images illustrates what that looks like. It's so interesting with the whole topic of dream. It kind of looks like, a dream, and at the beginning you see images from the past and I guess the beginnings of this movement, and then it kind of goes to now. It kind of goes to the modern day using bright colors, and it really shows what that looks like. I think that we need more encouragement. I think we need to talk about these issues in an alternative way, using, I feel like more optimism. I think there's so much negativity, and then we feel disencouraged when we have conversations, and we'll talk about these issues, but we'll feel disencouraged, and people tell you, well, this sucks, this is horrible, and that's that. Like, that's the way things are. No, that's not the case. We can still complete the dream. We can still better our world. It's not enough to just acknowledge that issue exists.
So for what age group would you recommend this book?
Well, I think one of the cool parts about this book is that, yes, while it is marked as a children's book, it's not just for little children. It's really for everyone. It's for kids and what I like to call big kids, which I really mean adults, like adult big kids, and kids my age as well. And I think that it's really important that everyone reads this because everyone needs to be encouraged. I think not only the 5-year-old needs to be encouraged, but the 65-year-old needs to be encouraged because we're just around, it seems, so much discouragement. And I get it. These 5 years have been really hard on us. I mean, we've seen a rise on everything. I mean, and then COVID, and then there's been a rise in mass shootings, and there seems to be all this pushback. But we have to keep on pushing. And so I think things like this will help give people encouragement of all ages. And I think the older you are, the more encouraged you are. And then they'll hopefully go back to their communities and do something. And it doesn't have to be anything like crazy and sophisticated and I guess Nobel Prize worthy. You can do something in your community to better it. And it doesn't have to be, if everyone pitches in, it doesn't have to be something marked as huge. I mean, everything counts.
In the book, you talk about rocks in the road, obviously those issues that we still have with us. What are some of the most important issues to you that you want to make sure your voice is heard in regard to?
Well, I feel like all human rights in general, anything that but violates human rights, I think since we're humans, we should all be able to have. There are certain rights that are fundamental, and I don't see why people don't treat them like they're fundamental and universal, and also the environment. I mean, there are so many human rights, and I believe if my grandparents were alive today, they would be just as focused and committed to to climate change as they are to human rights. Because listen, without a clean environment, we can't get around. And if we can't get around, then we can't even solve these other human rights issues. So climate change is important, and it is quite evident that it exists with global warming. Because I mean, look at our winter, for instance. Our winter has been quite warm in many places, and usually it would be much colder, but because of global warming, it seems that the winters are getting warmer and the summers are getting more hotter. I mean, summers, of course, since it's summer, summers are supposed to be hot, but they are getting warmer and warmer, and this is all a result of global warming. So global warming does exist, and we need to take care of our Earth, because if we can't take care of our Earth, like I said, we can't get around. If we can't get around, we can't solve these issues. And so I think that what the book does is it really brings together these issues. So instead of being like, first we're going to solve this, this, and this, it really just talks about what the world that we can have overall, and they kind of are all connected, and you see that in the book.
What is the sort of overall message that you hope readers will take from the book?
Encouragement. It's almost like a pitch. It's almost like, well, you see this world, and all this vibrance and color. Well, we can have it. It's not too late. We can have this world, and encouraging people to do something rather than sitting down and, yes, acknowledging these issues, but rather than sitting down and sulking and being like, well, this is an issue. And we can't do anything about it, and it sucks, and that's that. No, we can actually do something. And like I said, I can't say this but it doesn't have to be something big. You don't have to do something crazy. I mean, if you feel that devoted and dedicated, then yes, go ahead and go for it. But you don't have to do something, I guess, something like major. Everyone can do something. Everyone can pitch in and do a little something.
The book is We Dream a World, Carrying the Light from My Grandparents, Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King by Yolanda Renee King. Yolanda, thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you for having me.
If you'd like to purchase We Dream a World, I've placed a link for you in the description below. Thank you for watching this edition of the Kids Bookshelf. And if you'd like to see more videos about children's books and their authors, be sure to like, subscribe, and click on the bell to be notified about future programs. And if you're looking for books for young adult and older readers, be sure to check out my Some Books Considered YouTube channel. I'm Dan Skinner. Until next time, keep sharing the gift of reading.